Just got back from town. Got here, UPS guy was here. He unboxed our $100 Amazon Vivor was the brand of this clamshell bearing puller. And why they call it a clamshell is because of the two halves of the shells for your bearings. Main thing with this is for pulling your side bearings. This gives you reasonable support over them like that. And then they have, this one has the bigger cup. This goes over it. Tighten that down so they're not splitting. Before you do that, you would want your puller over the top of it. This will not actually pull that one bearing there, and they say that when they sell the kit, is that it will not pull the pinion bearing on a Dana 80. It's supposed to be able to pull the pinion bearings and side bearings both on everything else. Since we got presses and regular bearing separators, I wasn't really worried about pinion bearings anyway. You notice these washers here are beveled on one side. That bevel matches the taper inside the clamshells. And there's a puller nut that goes in here. When you're doing the differential, they have a bar with different steps on it for going against your carrier so that you have something for it to push against. And then with your pinions for your smaller ones, this will just go right over the pinion without that bar, and the clamshell lock onto it. The problem with this is a smaller diameter than the pinion. They noted that there was some kind of an optional piece you could get to make it do the Dana 80s also, but didn't really matter to me. I saw the same general thing. They all looked the same, different names, anywhere from this one for $100 on up to a little over $300 for some of them. And, you know, I don't have any way of knowing, but they all seemed to look identical, including the little weld around the piece there. I'm just checking to see if it really does not fit the Dana 80. And it really does not fit the Dana 80. So that is confirmed. As they said, it does not fit the Dana 80. But it has the correct clamshell for the bearing. I think they were saying some kind of an adapter. I don't think it was a different puller tube. I think it was an adapter. I'm guessing the tube. I don't know. Okay, so found out a little bit more about the clamshell pullers. Still haven't actually used it. The concept is not going underneath the race of your bearing that you're pulling as a bearing separator or those jaw pullers that I'm used to having so that it catches the race and makes sure that you save the bearing. What you are doing with the clamshell is you are getting just under the cage and you are pulling on the cage. Normally, if you pull on a cage, you will ruin the bearing. And that is why those other pullers are meant to go all the way back under the bearing. And the reason why you ruin the bearing when you're just pulling under the cage is because pulling up on the cage, these rollers start to pivot against the shoulder on the top of the bearing, and they will just spread the cage out and ruin it. And you will do that with the clamshell puller too if you don't use it correctly. Ruining it is not a, it may happen anyway because they're really not meaning, the bearing manufacturer is not meaning for you to pull on the cage. So after you pull a bearing off with a clamshell, you want to look at your bearing real good if you're going to use it again. Make sure that this cage has not gotten damaged. Look and make sure that the rollers don't have extra dents below them, that they're not wavy. Make sure that it's right. You're going to have to look at it some. The reason they get away with this on the clamshell is you have your race. And you have to have the race that goes with the bearing, not just any old race. You put your clamshell on there, and this upper nut goes against the clamshell, and the lower one goes against your race so that it holds the race down on here. And by holding this race down on here, it keeps those rollers from being able to move out. So now while you're still pulling against the cage, you're pulling against the cage nicely. So it may very well save the bearings and make them where you can reuse it. It's just not guaranteed. Now, the upper one goes against this angle here as it looked earlier. The lower one, they had this turned over the other way, and there's people showing with them having the angle go down here. I turned it over so the flat goes against the flat on the bearing. And that just makes sense to me. Like I say, I haven't actually used the puller yet, but that's what makes sense to me. Then the other half would go on, put the retainer over the top, thumb that down so they stay together. Then you put your puller on here. I'm not pulling this off because these are actually good bearings on this particular carrier. I want to leave them on there. And yeah, I have no need to take them off at this point at least. oh yeah, here is the centerpiece, yes. The centerpiece in the carrier actually, as I was talking about, that the bolt in here drives against. And that's pretty obvious, as you'll see, whichever carrier you have, like that one, it doesn't fit well that side up. It's going to go one side or the other up to fit well. And you just run the screw out however much you need to for the height you're using, no big deal.